I'm Lucy Flores. I am the co-founder of Boost Media. We are a Latina digital media brand that centers Latina, US-based, English-dominant Latina stories and experiences and tries to put that into the mainstream with the purpose of dismantling and disrupting false and inaccurate stereotypes and narratives about what it means to be a US-based Latina.
There we go.
That's what we do. The topic of our conversation today is, the title itself is Culture Cast: How the Latino Latinx Point of View is Influencing Music, Media, and Culture. I really want to dig a little bit deeper into that in terms of, is it really influence? And if it is, what are we actually tangibly getting from that influence? And to have that conversation, I have this incredible panel of amazing women, Latinas. So I'm going to start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth Avellan is president of Ella Productions, and Elizabeth is just one of the handful of Latina producers that's working in Hollywood. She's known as, she's the VP of Austin-based Troublemaker Studios, and she produced box office hits like Sin City, the Spy Kids franchise. Oh yeah, exactly. Then we have Amanda in the middle. Amanda is the co-founder and publisher of the 19th News, and she's also a board member of the American Press Institute and Chicas Poderosas.
Yeah.
And then we have Michelle. She's a social entrepreneur and media tech founder. She empowers change makers to transform their vision into action for good. She's the co-founder and CEO of TECH23, which she's primarily representing here today. And that is for the purpose of advancement of Latinos in tech. TECH23 is producing entertaining and intentional digital content to bridge the tech career gap for nuestra gente and promote the achievements of the 23rd Latino. We're going to start with an inflection point, as I've been referring to, from the 90s, from the late 90s, early 2000s, the Latino explosion, right? So we all remember the Latino explosion, Ricky Martin, we're all living La Vida Loca. And all of these artists were achieving this cultural crossover, right? Latino and Hispanic. So let's be clear, there's a difference from Spain and from Latin America. And some were even in reverse. We saw some English artists crossing over into Spanish, quote unquote, Latin music. So for you all, my question is, what are your thoughts on some of the reasons that that moment was more of a cultural blip rather than this big, huge, massive cultural shift? Or perhaps you disagree with that framing. Perhaps there's a way to look at it as not necessarily being just a blip that happened in the 90s, because as we all know and recognize, that did not sustain itself after that long, right? We had this Latino explosion and then not a whole lot of anything.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because that's when Robert Rodriguez and I did El Mariachi, and then went on to do, Desperado, all the other films. Robert Rodriguez and I began, since the 80s together, and made all of that happen, made Troublemaker Studios from Austin. So, and I always have had the vision that the only way that you can grow talent in front of, behind the camera to be represented in films and TV, you have to plant seeds, you have to put people, you have to bring them back and put them again in movies, create their careers, to lift them up so that you can then, they can be at the table, as the top, box office winners and or whatever, box office earners. And I think that we did that. But when you're only one person, you can only make a couple of movies, every 3 years or so. I mean, and we're going fast. I mean, some people make one movie every 3 years. And I think we inspired some to come into the space. I think we did that. But I also think that, the seed, you plant the seed, and then nobody else does. So it becomes just a little milpa, of just a little corn, and it's not a whole ranch of growth in the space. And I feel that got stunted somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to this inflection point very directly because I was in my college dorm room living La Vida Loca with Ricky Martin, and it was like a very poignant moment in my my youth. But at that same moment, I was on campus also getting my first credit card without any knowledge of what I was doing because of the predatory lending practices. Going without the kind of financial literacy or knowing what I needed to know, not just about passing my classes and graduating, but also what it was to build wealth. And I think part of what the problem is and why that was a blip, maybe that was considered a trend. Ricky Martin was a trend. We're not a trend. We're driving population growth. We're generating wealth. What we need to be doing is capturing wealth.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes down to how are we equipping this generation, the next generation, to capture wealth and to be able to create those fields and create and design those spaces so that there is an enduring for whatever space you occupy, whether it's media or film or. So the reason it's not enduring is because we're not the ones, designing those spaces to cultivate things that last. And I think that's kind of maybe what's changing now, I hope. But anyway, a very small anecdote, and I vote yes, it was a blip.
Yeah, which to Elizabeth's point about the planting the seeds, right? It still needs watering. Who's doing the watering? Who owns the water, right? Like how do we access the water to have the seeds grow, to do everything that needs to flourish? It's ultimately a pipeline. And so if we don't have those resources that we need to help these seeds grow, then yeah, it very much could fizzle out.
I promise we did not coordinate the way that we sat to deliver this message, but literally everything Amanda just said then comes to me. So I was born in 1990, and so the lip we're talking about, I'm representing the point of view of what is today, this year turning 13 years old, which is Generation Alpha. And so Generation Alpha from 2010 to today, those are the individuals that are consuming what other people are producing and creating for them to consume, which was me in this era that you were talking about. And I didn't know what was happening, right? I was just consuming. And I remember just a couple of things. Spy Kids was one of them. I watched like all of them. But I remember very few things, right? I remember growing up watching novelas. Mm-hmm. And the novelas, maybe 1% of the content in the novelas was when they would go into an office building. And where every now and then there would be a businesswoman as a character of the novela. And if you all remember from the 90s, I haven't recently watched the novelas anymore, but that female that was represented as a businesswoman was wearing the tiniest skirt, was wearing like very revealing clothing, was sometimes just put in the position of the secretary, was very sexualized, and that's what I grew up watching. But then the movies that Elizabeth was working in the background, which I had no idea was coming from something that was just a few cities away, 3-hour drive or so. In those films, I was also seeing something similar but different. I was seeing almost a sense of like a character, a Latino character that was empowering, that was like, o sea, like, yo lo puedo hacer, like had like the ganas, like it had the like drive, it had like the poderosa mindset. So I saw like a mix of the two things, but to the blip question, I don't remember seeing it again until what we're experiencing now,
right,
which is completely different. And so yes, even though I didn't realize it was happening, but that brings us to the point of today, because right now that's what we are doing to the next generation, that in 5 years, now they're eligible for voting. They're going to be, by the end of the decade, becoming adults. So it's almost like a sense of responsibility we have now to design that piece in terms of media.
And I want to get into a little bit about also these inflection points are also influencing the way that we step into our identities, our power, etc. The thing about telenovelas is that they also were usually one color, right? They were very white passing or white Latinas. And obviously that's not the entire community. And I kind of mention that because I want to eventually get into your company, 23rd, and what that means. Because I think that is like, I'll just say that Latino only exists in the United States, right? We know that in every other Latin American country, certainly not in Spain, they're not referring to themselves as Latinos, right? Yeah. A big part of the reason why Latino only exists in the United States is because we aren't free to really truly step into our own identities. And what that means, the easiest way to go about that is to just put everybody into a box as opposed to truly stepping into our own identities and then coming together around those identities as a community. So let's fast forward 22 or so years, 2021, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, they release a report on Latino representation in film, television, and other publishing entities. And their study found that despite Latinos make up 12% of the media workforce, only 4% of that is in management, right, decision-making role, despite at that time making up 18% of the US population, and we know that that's now closer to about 20. The study also found that between 2010 and 2019, so this is basically the period after this Latino explosion, that number only increased by 1% over 10 years, despite this massive presence that we had across culture. And this panel is about how the Latino point of view is influencing music, media, and culture, and yet we obviously see that these numbers don't represent that, they don't reflect that. And so from your vantage point, how do we actually turn this quote unquote influence and these inflection points on culture into something that's actually tangible for us?
So for TECH23, TECH23, we actually believe that media and entertainment has an economic impact, and it can have an economic impact in the lives of the people that are consuming that content that's being generated. And so, like Luz mentioned earlier, we're a media and entertainment company, but it's for the advancement of Latinos in tech. And we chose to be a media and entertainment company instead of just a community-based organization or a nonprofit, which we had done before. Because media is all around us, it's literally on your cell phone, and that is how the current and the next generation are consuming their content. What we wanted to do with TECH23 was that we wanted to help bring forward the faces of the Latinos that are working in tech, because where are we? We start to see the maybe 3 to 5 that are in our city, and we know, oh, those are the Latinos that are in tech, and we only see them there in that circle,
Right.
and the rest of the US is not seeing that. We're 62 million Latinos in the US, and TECH23 is intentionally, first of all, bringing us together as a Latino community by intentionally representing the 22 Latin American flags and the 23rd Latino, which is us here in the US. So I'm originally from Morelia, Michoacan, Mexico. I grew up in Houston. In Mexico, am Mexican. And my family in Mexico today is Mexican. They're not Latinos, they're Mexican, so Mexicano. And when we're in the States, the Latino here is being influenced by all the other flags, not just in Latin America, but literally all around the world, because that's how diverse our country is. And so we are intentionally looking for Latinos that are in tech representing all the flags so that we can put them on a screen. And right now that screen are things like YouTube, are things like Spotify, which now does video. And maybe in the future will be on the big screen. Maybe we can talk about that in a year. Let's put a 1-year goal. For the purposes of getting more Latinos to go into tech roles, either as founders or as employees, because if you go into a tech role, like statistically, like the salary is amazing. And that immediately, because of our cultura, will impact your family. It will immediately bring you up as a community. And now that you have the extra income, now you're able to, how do I use that? You can invest it, you can own more businesses, you can be philanthropic, like all the pieces. So for us, media and entertainment, it is a tool for economic impact and to like bring this community forward, but through an entertaining lens.
Absolutely. So that actually brings us to today, and we're going to wrap up this conversation. Latino representation across all media newsrooms, Hollywood, etc., still grossly underrepresented. However, we're now seeing almost a bit of an anti-crossover sentiment. 2020, Bad Bunny makes history, first Spanish language album to hit the Billboard 200 with #1. Just about a week ago or so, Karol G sets another record, first female Spanish language album, #1 on the Billboard 200. And of course, who's gonna forget Bad Bunny opening up the Grammys. how can we support, how can we encourage, how do we frankly turn this, learn from the lessons of the 2000 point, the inflection point, and not allow ourselves to be just used and seen as a consumer opportunity. Latinos have a multi-trillion-dollar purchasing power, right? Yet the way that I look at it is that that's not a number I'm proud of, because people see us as their wallet, right? They'll take from us, but they're not going to invest in us. What are your all's thoughts on how we do not let this moment get away from us?
Well, I think that the big inflection point, in my opinion, the first one I just spoke about, and then this one, is that I finally am seeing that we call ourselves Latinos from all the different countries, from all the different places. And that's a huge difference from when I started in this media, because people are like, oh, well, she's not really Latina, they were born here, and and it was like this mentality. Oh, she has blue eyes, she's not really Latina, or she's black, she's not Latina. It's like, she's Chinese, not Latina. I mean, I have a friend, Liza Scarborough, fully Panamanian, third generation Chinese. We spoke Spanish. She didn't speak Chinese. So, and people were like, what language are you speaking? Back in the 90s, we went to see the Joy Luck Club. And this Indian guy was like, what language are you? Because he could not square that whole thing. So funny. Anyway, so I think that that's a huge thing. You guys have no idea. This panel, it gives me chills to hear you speak that way. Because that's where we change it. We are Latinos. We are, even if you're only half Latino, you're Latino and Latina, and you embrace that and stand up for all of us. And we're here, and we are a force, and your money is your vote.
Okay, so for me, firstly, TECH23's video podcast is in Spanglish, by the way. And the inclusion in our podcast is that we have to manually transcribe everything into English so that non-Spanish speaking Latinos can read the subtitles and be able to also consume the material. So that's the inclusive part. We're making sure we're translating in English and the subtitles, because it's Spanglish and the AI does not go back and forth between languages, but coming soon.
And that happened with the Grammys, right?
Yes,
With
exactly.
Bad Bunny, right? It said
Exactly.
singing in Spanish.
Exactly. It was like non-English.
Singing in non-English.
So
That's what it said. Yeah.
TECH23 US, the subtitles will not say non-English. When it goes to Spanish, we are making sure we translate. But Bad Bunny example, I love that you brought that up, because this is my comment is to stop undervaluing the value that is already in our own communities. And we were invited to a Bad Bunny concert because a mentor gave us tickets. And we were sitting there in these floor seats that I would never even be able to afford, and looking around and realizing every person in this sold out concert that happened back to back in Houston, not the recent one, the one before, every person in there spent at least about $300, at least, because they had to buy their ticket, they had to buy their outfit, they had to buy their concessions, they had to buy the swag afterwards, at least $300. That's, I think, a lowballed estimate. And I realized that this concert, to your point earlier, it was all in Spanish. There was never one English thing said in this whole concert, and the whole Toyota Center was singing every single song. Everything was in Spanish. So the people in that room that were bringing the capital were all Latinos, and mostly, right? Probably there was some non-Latinos, but Latinos. And in that moment, we realized, why do we think that we have to go outside of our own community to find the investment that we need for our companies?
That part.
It was there in that room, and it was there in a fun and entertaining way. And that is why TECH23 is taking that into what we're building with our media and entertainment company, because Latinos want to build, we want to create, but there are gaps that need to be filled that are already being filled in our community, but we need to start lifting each other up and connecting and not competing, and showcasing who has the capital resources, great. Who is upskilling entrepreneurs, great. Who has the media and the production connections, great. Start opening those doors for our nuestra gente, so that we can be the ones that are producing the things that we want to see and that we want to consume, and then we get to benefit from it. It is all here. It's in nuestra comunidad already, and that is like the biggest thing I want to leave, because that's what we need to remember walking out of here with whatever you are going to create, whether or not it's in the media and entertainment space, if it's in business, if it's a nonprofit, if it's in a tech solution. It's here in nuestra gente. We got it. We can make it happen together.
Amen.